Dodge City, Kansas. October 1878. The coin hit the lacquered counter harder than Dorsey McHugh meant it to, and Mrs. Verley Stack didn't flinch. She'd heard louder coins from quieter men. "An hour," he said. "Upstairs, the thin one with the dark hair who don't talk." Mrs. Stack lifted the coin between two fingers and weighed it like a butcher weighing liver. Behind her, a parlor lamp guttered low, throwing the velvet wallpaper into a color halfway between blood and rust. A piano somewhere was missing 2 notes and pretending it wasn't. The room smelled of bay rum, cheap rose oil, and the sour bottom of a whiskey glass left out since noon. "That'd be Wren," she said. "She's particular. I ain't asking her to recite scripture." Mrs. Stack's eyes moved over him the way a cattle buyer moves over a steer he intends to pay below market for. She saw the dust on his hat brim, the Texas cut of his coat, the way his right hand never quite left his hip. "You armed under that coat, mister?" "I'm armed everywhere, ma'am." She almost smiled. "Top of the stairs. Second door. You hurt one of my girls. You don't ride out of Dodge. You crawl, and not far." He climbed the stairs slow, counting them, because counting was something his hands could do while his head did the harder work. He had not come to the Lone Star Rooms for what men usually came for. He had come because a freighter in Caldwell had told him 3 weeks ago, and 4 whiskeys deep, that a man named Garrick Sloane took his pleasure here on Saturday nights and tipped in gold dust the assayer couldn't trace. 3 years Dorsey had been hunting Sloane. 3 years since a Sunday morning in a sod house outside Buffalo Gap, and a woman named Nell, and a Dutch oven, still warm on the table when the neighbors found her. Tonight was Saturday. Tonight Sloane was supposed to be in this house, and Dorsey meant to be sitting in a room near enough to hear his voice through a wall. Tss. Before we go back to where this began, tell us where you're listening from today. And if frontier stories of danger, loyalty, desire, and hard-earned survival are your kind of story, subscribe to True Western. The second door opened before he knocked. The woman behind it had already drawn the curtain across the window, already turned the lamp down to the color of a held breath. She was small, dark-haired, sharp at the wrists and the collarbone, with the kind of face that had once been pretty and had since learned to be useful instead. "Come in or don't," she said. "Door costs the same either way." He came in. She closed it behind him and slid a brass bolt he hadn't expected to see in a house like this. He noted it. He noted everything. "Wren," he said. "Miranda, when I'm being lied to. Wren, when I'm being paid. I paid. Then sit." There was 1 chair and 1 bed. He took the chair. She watched him take it, and something in her face shifted by a hair's width, the way a card player's face shifts when the deal goes differently than expected. "You're not here for me," she said. "Didn't say I was. You sat in the chair." He looked at her then, properly, for the first time. Her eyes were gray and tired and entirely awake. She was barefoot under a dressing gown the color of weak tea, and she held herself like someone who had learned a long time ago that stillness was a kind of armor. "I'm here because the room next door has thin walls," he said, "and a man's coming up those stairs in maybe an hour who I need to listen to." "Which man?" "That ain't your business, mister." She sat on the edge of the bed and folded her hands in her lap like a schoolteacher. "Every man in this house is my business. That's what Mrs. Stack pays me to know." He weighed her. She weighed back. "Garrick Sloane," he said. The lamp guttered. She did not move. But something happened inside her face that was not movement. Something more like a shutter coming down inside a dark house. "You best leave," she said, very quietly. "Why?" "Because Mr. Sloane don't come here on Saturdays. A man in Caldwell told me he does." "A man in Caldwell told you wrong, or told you on purpose." She stood up. The dressing gown shifted at her shoulder, and he looked away from the bare line of it, not out of decency, but because something in him refused tonight to let his eyes wander where his grief was supposed to be. "Mr. Joer, Sloane comes Wednesdays, and he don't go upstairs. He goes to the back office with Mrs. Stack, and they count things together." "What things?" "Things that don't get written down." Dorsey leaned forward. "You know him." Mister, I know everybody. You know him by name. You said Mr. Sloane like the word fit your mouth. She was quiet for a long time. Down the hall, a woman laughed too loudly at something nobody had said funny. A door closed. Somewhere, a man was crying without knowing the walls were thin. Who was she? Wren asked. He did not understand for a moment. You didn't come hunting Garrick Sloane over money, she said. You came hunting him over a woman. I can tell. I've watched 100 men come up these stairs, and I can tell the ones who climb them for a dead woman. He felt the muscle in his jaw move against his will. My wife, he said. Buffalo Gap. Spring of '75. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she looked older than she had a minute before, and also, oddly, younger, as though something she had been carrying had stepped briefly out from behind her. Then you didn't come to the wrong house, she said. You came to the wrong hour. But I know the name you're hunting, and it ain't only Sloane. He had not expected to sit in a brothel room and be the one undone. She poured him water from a cracked pitcher into a cracked glass and handed it across without ceremony. Her fingers were cold. He noticed because his weren't. 3 years ago, she said, a man rode through here on his way down to the nations. He drank too much and he talked too much, and he came up these stairs and paid for 2 hours and used 1. The other he spent telling me what a brave thing he had done in Texas. Bragging, mister. The way some men brag about a horse they broke. What did he say? He said he'd been paid by a cattle outfit to clear a parcel of land near Buffalo Gap. He said the husband was gone to drive beeves north. He said the wife wouldn't sign. He said she was stubborn and pretty, and that some women only sign once you make them afraid, and some women don't sign even then. Her voice did not change. It got, if anything, smaller. He said she went for a rifle. He said he was faster. He said he was paid extra to make it look like Comanche. Dorsey's hand was on the glass. The glass was cracking further under his hand. He set it down before it broke. His name. Tobias Cray. That ain't Sloane. No, sir. Cray pulled the trigger. Sloane paid the wage. She looked at the door, then back at him. Sloane wanted that land for the spur line he's been pushing for. He's wanted it for 5 years. He'll have it inside another 2. He's a patient man, and the territory loves him. Why are you telling me this? She did not answer at first. She sat back down on the edge of the bed and rubbed her wrist absently, and he saw by the lamplight the old white seam of a scar that ran from her thumb up under the sleeve of her gown. Because Cray came back through last spring, she said, and he didn't remember me, and he paid for an hour, and he used it, and when he was leaving, he told me a different story about a different woman, in Indian territory this time. And I have been waiting, mister, for somebody to walk up those stairs who could carry the rest of what I know, somewhere it might matter. Why not the marshal? She laughed once without sound. Marshal eats at Mr. Sloane's table on Sundays. Mrs. Sloane sets a fine roast. Why not just leave? With what? She lifted her hands and let them fall. I owe this house $400 before I owe myself a nickel. Mrs. Stack keeps the books, and the books keep me. He looked at her a long time. The lamp threw half her face into shadow, and the other half into a soft amber light that made her look like a daguerreotype somebody hadn't finished developing. He understood in that quiet way a man understands things he doesn't want to. That she was not telling him this only out of justice. She was telling him because his arrival was the closest thing to a door she'd seen in a long time. Where's Cray now? He said. Downstairs. He's been at the bar since 6. He's the one in the green coat with the scar on his lip from a horse that didn't like him. Dorsey rose halfway out of the chair. Sit down, she said sharply. Sit down, mister. You go down those stairs hot, and you'll die on the boardwalk, and he'll ride out laughing. You think Mrs. Stack lets a man bleed in her parlor on a Saturday? She'll cut you herself to keep the carpet clean. He sat. You came up here to listen through a wall, she said. Then listen. He always takes Permelia, third door. He always drinks himself stupid first. He'll be up here inside the hour, and he'll be slow, and he'll be loud, and you'll hear every word he says. And when he leaves Parmelia, he leaves out the back, through the alley, behind the kitchen, because he don't like being seen on the main street after dark. That alley is where a man waits, if a man knows to wait. You've been planning this. Mister, I've been living this. They sat together while the house went on around them. He did not touch her, and she did not move toward him, and yet the room between them filled, slowly, with a heat that had nothing to do with the lamp. It was the heat of two people deciding, without saying so, to trust each other, in a place where trust was the most expensive thing on the menu. After a while she stood and crossed to the window and parted the curtain a finger's width. The lamplight caught her at the shoulder and the throat and the small bare arch of one foot. And he looked away, and he understood that the looking and the looking away were both part of grief, and neither of them was a betrayal. Tell me about her, Wren said without turning. Nell. That her name, Nell Strawn before I married her, Nell McCoo after. She was a Methodist daughter, and she could shoot a coyote off a calf at 60 yards. And she used to hum when she needed bread, the same 4 notes, over and over, and I used to pretend it drove me crazy. He stopped. He had not said her name aloud to another human being in 11 months. She wouldn't have signed that paper. He was right about that part. She was stubborn. You were on a drive. Sedalia. I came back to a fresh grave and a neighbor woman who couldn't look at me. Wren let the curtain fall. She did not say, I'm sorry. He was grateful for that. People had been sorry at him for 3 years, and none of it had done any work. Instead, she said, was there a smell when you came in the house? He looked up. What? In the sod house, when you came in, was there a smell? Bread, he said, and his throat closed on the word. She'd put bread in the oven that morning. The neighbors hadn't thought to take it out. It was black as coal by the time I got there. The whole house smelled like burnt bread for a week. I couldn't. I still can't. I know, she said. I know, mister. There's always a smell. Mine was lilac water. A man wore lilac water, and now I can't pass a bush in June without my hands shaking. It was the first time he had heard her say something about herself, and she said it the way you'd mentioned the weather, and he understood that she had a Garrick Sloane of her own somewhere behind her, and that she had been carrying him a great deal longer than 3 years. Boots on the stairs, heavy ones, slow. Wren's eyes flicked to the wall. That's him, she breathed. Tobias Cray was a loud man drunk and a loud man sober, and the wall between Parmelia Hook's room and Wren's was not built to keep secrets from anyone with patience. Dorsey sat with his back against the plaster and his hat on his knee and his hand on the grip of the Colt under his coat, and he listened. He heard Parmelia's voice, low and professional, performing welcome. He heard Cray's voice, thick with whiskey, performing himself. He heard the brag begin the way Wren had said it would, the way a certain kind of man cannot help but lay his crimes on the bedspread like calling cards because he has nowhere else to be admired. He heard, in pieces, between the rustle of clothes and the creak of the rope-strung bed, Sloane, that Texas business, easier than the one in the Nations. Paid in coin, not paper. That's how you know it's clean. Dorsey's eyes were closed. His face was wet. He had not known his face was wet until Wren, sitting beside him on the floor now, with her shoulder a half-inch from his, reached up without looking and pressed the heel of her hand against his cheek and held it there. She did not shush him. She did not whisper that it was all right. It was not all right. It was the opposite of all right. She only held her hand against his face, dry palm to wet skin, and let him hear his wife's killer name himself through a wall in a Kansas brothel on a Saturday night. When Cray laughed, Dorsey's hand tightened on the Colt until the knurling printed itself into his palm. Not here, Wren said, almost soundless. Not in this house. You promised. He had not promised. But he nodded, because she had asked, and because she had earned the right to ask. Cray was perhaps 20 minutes in the room. Then boots again, heavier with drink, and the brush of a coat against the hallway wall, and the back staircase complaining all the way down. Wren stood. Her hand left his face, and he felt the absence of it like cold. "The alley," she said. "Now. And Mr. McHugh. Dorsey. He's drunk and he's slow, but he ain't stupid. He carries a knife in his right boot and a derringer in his vest pocket on the left side. He favors his right knee from a fall last winter. That's all I know. Don't waste it." He looked at her, and for one bright, dangerous second he thought about kissing her, and he didn't, because a kiss in that moment would have been a coward's punctuation on a sentence that wasn't finished yet. "I'll come back," he said. "Don't say that unless you mean it. I mean it. Men have meant it before, not like me." She almost smiled. It was the first time he'd seen it, and it was small and tired, and it cost her something to spend. "Go," she said. The alley smelled of grease and lye and the cold iron edge of October. Dorsey came out of the side door with his hat pulled low and his coat open at the holster, and found Tobias Cray pissing against the back wall of the Lone Star rooms with the contented hum of a man who believed himself invisible. Cray. The humming stopped. Cray turned, slow, fumbling at his trousers, his face doing the calculation drunk men do when a stranger uses their name in the dark. "Do I know you, friend?" "No. But you knew my wife." The calculation got faster. Cray's right hand drifted toward his boot in a motion he probably thought was subtle. "Don't," Dorsey said. "I already know about the knife, and the derringer, and the knee." Cray's eyes flicked up toward the second-floor window where a lamp was burning behind a tea-colored curtain, and something ugly moved across his face. "That little bitch," he said. It was the wrong last sentence to choose. Dorsey did not shoot him in the alley. He had promised in a fashion, and he was a man who kept his fashions. He hit Cray once across the temple with the long barrel of the Colt, and Cray went down into the wet of his own piss without grace, and Dorsey knelt in the cold mud and put his knee on the man's chest and his mouth close to the man's ear. "You're going to ride to Hays City with me," he said. "You're going to sit in front of a federal judge who don't eat Sunday roast at Garrick Sloane's table. You're going to say his name out loud in a room with a stenographer in it, or I am going to leave you in a draw between here and there for the wolves to argue over. You pick which, Cray. You've got till morning." Cray made a wet sound that might have been a word. Dorsey hauled him up by the collar and walked him, stumbling, to the livery 2 streets over, where a stable boy who asked no questions for $2 saddled 2 horses and looked the other way. If he came back for her, the way he'd said he would, 3 weeks later. By then Tobias Cray had talked, in the wood-paneled room in Hays City, more than any of them had expected him to, because cowards talk fastest when they understand that the man who paid them has already begun pretending they were never on the payroll. Garrick Sloane was not yet in irons. Men like Sloane rarely were, in Kansas in 1878. But the territorial papers had his name in them now, and the spur-line investors out of Chicago had gone quiet, and a federal marshal who did not eat at the Sloane table on Sundays had begun asking questions in a voice that did not invite charm. It was not justice. Dorsey had lived long enough to know that justice was a word townspeople used and lawyers sold. It was a wound opened in the side of a powerful man, and wounds in powerful men sometimes festered into something useful, and sometimes did not. He would have to live with the not knowing. Mrs. Verley Stack met him at the foot of her stairs with her arms crossed and her mouth a flat seam. "She's upstairs," Mrs. Stack said, "packing what she's got, which ain't much. You paying her debt, mister? Or am I sending the boys after her come Tuesday?" "How much?" $411. "That's a hell of a lot of nightgowns, ma'am. That's a hell of a lot of board, mister. And the books are the books." He counted it out on the lacquered counter in paper and coin, and Mrs. Stack counted it twice after him, and then a third time because she was a woman who had been cheated by gentler-looking men than him. "You take her out of Dodge," Mrs. Stack said. "You take her clean. She don't come back through here on a bad week looking for a roof. You hear me, McHugh? I am not a charity, and I am not her mother." "I hear you." Mrs. Stack's eyes softened for exactly 1 heartbeat, and in that heartbeat he saw a woman who had perhaps, once, climbed her own set of stairs in a town she could not now name. "She's a good one," Mrs. Stack said. "Quiet ones always are. Don't waste her." Wren came down the stairs in a traveling dress the color of riverstone, with a carpet bag in one hand and a face that was trying very hard not to hope. The scar on her wrist was covered by a cuff. The dressing gown was gone. She looked in daylight like somebody's sister, somebody's cousin, somebody who might once have hummed 4 notes while kneading bread. He did not take her arm. He had not earned that yet, and she had not offered it. "Where?" she said, when they were on the boardwalk. "I got a piece of ground in the Panhandle. It ain't much. Cattle. A creek. A house I haven't slept in for 3 years. You sleeping in it now?" "I aim to try." She looked at him sideways. The October wind moved a piece of her dark hair across her cheek. "I ain't a wife, Dorsey. I ain't asking you to be one." "Then what are you asking?" He thought about it a long while, standing there with the wagon waiting and the cold coming down off the plains and the smell of wood smoke from somebody's stove, a street over. "I'm asking you to ride south with a man who owes you a debt he can't pay," he said, "and see if there's a porch you'd want to sit on for a season. And after that, you tell me, and I'll listen." She did not say yes. She did not say no. She climbed up onto the wagon seat by herself, because she had been climbing things by herself for a long time, and she settled her carpetbag between her feet, and she looked straight ahead down the rutted street toward the open country south of town. "Drive," she said. He drove. Behind them, Dodge City went on being Dodge City, with its lamps coming up against the dusk and its piano still missing the same 2 notes. Somewhere in a Hayes City cell, Tobias Cray was learning what his own voice sounded like in the dark. Somewhere, in a fine house with a Sunday roast on the table, Garrick Sloane was hearing, for the first time in a long career, the sound of investors not returning his letters. And on the wagon seat beside Dorsey McHugh, a woman who had carried another man's confession for 3 years sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the road, and after a long while, without looking at him, she let her shoulder rest lightly against his. He did not move. He was afraid to move. He was a man who had bought an hour upstairs and been given, instead, the rest of a life he had not believed he would be allowed to want. The wind smelled, faintly, of burnt bread. He let it. "A chipple,"